Welcome everyone to the City of Cottonwood Heights. It's Tuesday, November 5th, election night. This is the work session. Begin by just reminding everyone we're going to try and be efficient tonight and be through with our work session just prior to 7, so we don't have to come back in after our business meeting. I hope the business meeting is through by 8, so we can go back and watch the election results and things like that. Just going to switch the agenda slightly because Kylene has given from regarding Lights and Analytics and traffic. So the first thing, let's just review the business meeting agenda, and then we'll come back to the first items. So our friends from Blipsy will be presenting a check to the Cottonwood Heights Foundation tonight. I assume that's happening. That's the first thing. That's the welcome pledge. We have a canine police dog that we're going to recognize, Canine Officer Chip, who's recently passed away with, was it cancer or what?
It was cancer, and yes, I've left, we did a plaque with his collar. He doesn't know what it is.
We didn't know.
Yeah, his wife stole the collar for me, and
So
we had it, so it's behind the dais, so you guys can present to him.
So we present that to
Tom Doherty.
Doherty, yeah. Okay. Our citizen comments, we have a public hearing on the proposed budget amendments. We went through that in the last meeting, and I thought it was clear on if anybody has any further questions on that. We have public comments on the affordable housing plan update. Mike will be talking about that in the work session here in a moment. I'd like to have a couple of questions. Matt Schiff will talk about the Fort Union intersection data. We'll talk about some of the challenges, and because a long time to get it completed, we have some debates on how traffic was flowing through, and now we have some actual data points to look at, so we'll have that. So I'm wondering, the fact that it's not on our work session, Matt, could you take a minute now and tell us a little bit about what that's going to email?
Yep. Yeah, just
I'd like to see it on the work session.
real briefly,
Here it is.
yeah, if you just want to go to that third slide, would be fine. Basically what this is about,
Oh, I know what that is.
That's all you needed to say.
yeah, split failures. We're going to be discussing, well, I'll be discussing, it's a metric, it's a way to measure the effectiveness of an intersection. One of the ways is a split failure, basically meaning getting a platoon of cars through a light during the cycle.
Was the
If-
platoon exist?
Yeah,
How many, what's the platoon?
whatever cars that aren't in that go to the stop bar. If you go back 2 slides, sorry, I'll back it up.
I mean, I just don't.
So where that green area is,
Uh-huh.
if there's a car in there at the time, it's counting it through the cycle, whether it be in the red first 5 seconds are red, or whether it be on a green cycle. So if there's no cars in there during when the light shuts off or goes down, you've cleared the platoon. If you have cars in there like 80% of the time on green and then 80% of the time on red, you have a failure. Okay, so if you can't, a split failure is failing to get a platoon of cars, a reasonable amount of cars through the intersection. There's different ways it gaps it. It turns itself off. It will gap out, meaning if there's a length of time, a preset length of time that no cars enter that zone, the light will switch and start onto another cycle. So it's called gapping out. Force out, once the light runs its cycle, it's set for 60 seconds and it runs its cycle for 60 seconds. It forces itself out, it shuts off, turns red. That's another way the cycle will end. And then there's preemption, where, for like instance, the police and the fire have a system in their cars where they can preempt the signal and turn it to green so that they have ways to get through. So there's all these different variables. If you'll go back to those 3, back up 3.
Forward.
Yeah, forward, sorry. So what the Purdue split failure is just a program developed by the University of Purdue, once they get the naming rights of these different metrics on failures. And what we're seeing, and we'll show it tonight, is, for instance, this is taken on the left, anything in yellow is a split failure, meaning it didn't work, okay? Cars either got left there or many, there could have been a few things that were happening. Car could have pulled up at the very end of the cycle. But this is the northbound through lane on October 14th. So middle of last month on the left is, remember, yellow's bad. Prior to that, if you'll go to, and you can see the February the 11th, which is where we have data before construction began. This is showing what the split failures were looking like on the same leg. So once again, remember, yellow's bad. So you can see some of the things that are occurring in there on that. Now, if you want to go forward and keep going. Go one more. So we'll be showing tonight, this is the overall, all the movements within the intersection. This is northbound, southbound, east, west, turn movements and everything. These are what we call the split failures that occurred. The blue is we took a 3-week cut out of February and a 3-week cut out of October and compared the two to see what was happening.
Is the timing on both the same? Is this timing or is it design?
This is a little of both.
Okay.
This is a little of both. Because the other component that we would look at, which we don't have data for, unfortunately, would be the approach delay. What happens actual time you're delayed. This is just a signal delay that you're looking at right now. Unfortunately, we don't have that data. It's just not there.
Do you know, in the two windows that you compared, the total traffic counts?
We do now. We finally.
Are they similar enough that?
Yeah, the traffic counts are,
In
the
the same
volumes
range?
are in the, I mean, within a couple of thousand here and there, and that sounds like a lot, but it's really not when you're counting about 48,000 cars go through this intersection at any given time.
A couple thousand over 3 weeks or a couple thousand a day?
Over this comparison for the week, perhaps, the volumes are there. So yes, to answer your question. And we took a Sunday through 2 Sundays, well, we pulled out 3 Sundays to give a comparison, because this is the data that was going on. And so that was the best we can do. And what this is showing is, in effect, it's working. It's not saying it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it has reduced quite significantly the number of split failures that occur.
Did you say this is 3 Sundays? Or
Yeah, this goes from, I can tell you the dates.
You can see the Sundays there.
It goes from Sunday, October 6th through Sunday, October 27th. And then this one goes Sunday, February 3rd to Sunday, February 24th. We wanted to pick days to compare versus dates. We just wanted to make sure we're showing the days of the week versus the dates. And so it is showing a significant change in those split failures. Approach delays, we don't have that data to be able to.
Well, I wanted to touch base
compare.
on that quickly.
Yeah.
You presented in there, and even though it's not on our work session agenda, I think it's important to get a little bit of a heads up before we go into the work session. So thank you, Matt.
Glad you got the slideshow.
All right, we have a couple action items. Ordinance 332 is regarding a budget amendment. Right? Yeah. So, any questions on that? Scott, any final comments? It's the same as you presented in the last meeting. Ordinance 333, it's wireless facilities.
Small amendment, I'll talk about it in the work session.
Okay, all right, okay, super. All right, let's come back to, any questions on the business meeting agenda? Well, I just jump back into the work session. Yeah, Y2 analytics will be here in a minute, so, Alex, you wanna come up, join us?
Yeah,
Paul's doing this
absolutely.
as well?
I'll let him go first and then I'll
Okay.
Go ahead.
jump in.
Yeah.
So we had the marathon back in September. It's been a little while since we've reported back. This year was an interesting year for us because we had no major events. A few complaints, no major issues on the course. We did have the 2 obligatory drunks that we always have. Some lady was headed to McDonald's for her morning session of food and was significantly impaired, and we had another one on the course as well, so. No major challenges for us. We got Wasatch open both directions at 9 a.m. There was some backups, but not significant. We were cycling people through up on Wasatch with a little bit of a delay, but we got it open both directions at 9 a.m.
Do you remember what it was the first year, was it like 12 or something?
The first year, way back when, it was probably a little later than that, because it was a
Like
hard
2.
closure, probably 1 o'clock.
Yeah, 1 or 2.
And then we opened it 2 years ago at about 10:35 in the morning, and then we agreed to see if we could find a better way to do that, and we opened it at 9 a.m. both directions. So, took some significant more resources to do that, but we got it done. So, other than that, it went well, no major issues. So, but that's from my perspective.
Overall,
Few complaints.
Opening was about 10, down 13.
Yeah, so that one, so what you have is 1:15 PM is the 6 hours and 15 minutes that they need to operate the event. And we've had it open by that time, but remember, it progressively opens down the course as we clear intersections. So we had the whole race course open by 1:15 again this year. The pickup lasted a little bit, or was a little bit shorter this year. We upgraded the pickup process. In previous years, their barricade company went both directions. They'd go up and back and up. This year, we made it in mass, which required some additional resources, but as the last runner met the time mark for that intersection, we pulled the course, and we just progressively worked westbound until everything was off the course, so.
From our perspective, it was another successful year. We had 31 businesses take advantage of the marketing opportunities that we do hard print and digital, which is the most we've ever had before. And we were able to get the CHBA on there in the back, and a lot of those business, I went into a couple of them, they had no clue that it even existed, so, it was, and we can continue to collaborate on that every year and help get the word out, so, it seems like the businesses know it's happening every year now, and they're getting used to it and wanting to take advantage of that. We had good conversations with both Hillside Tire and Big O. I was able to talk to both of those. They know what's going on, but Hillside actually took advantage and did some advertising with us, so free marketing. It was a successful event in our eyes. We had just slightly over 4,100 runners, just down a little bit, but still the premier marathon that people are coming to expect, and the weather was absolutely perfect, and we had 0 transports to the hospital, which is another good success on our end. But, yeah, so we're super excited, and Jared's gonna, you brought up the Cottonwood Foundation. You know, we were gonna reach out to more Cottonwood Heights Foundation organizations, different nonprofits within the community, that we can see if they can take over aid stations and those kind of things to get some more
Work with us too,
donations.
through the business
Yeah.
association as well. I think there'd be some interest there because there's
Perfect.
philanthropic things going on.
Yeah.
And I wanted to speak to that quick, oh, and sorry, I know I need to be by the mics. So if I could on that, we would love for the city's help to identify organizations that might want to take place. In the past, we've always contacted high schools, cross-country teams, football teams, whatever, kind of the low-hanging fruit. But there are probably a lot that we don't know of. And so if the council, or perhaps if there were even a liaison from the city assigned, Anne herself or someone else in the events department that could work with us to help us identify groups, that would be most helpful, rather than just having it be a nebulous, oh yeah, we'll reach out to some, if we are given direction on, hey, here's 20 groups you can contact, we'll do it. The hard thing for us is with the event being in September, a lot of the groups that are school-oriented are only in session for about 3 weeks before it's race day. And so it helps us if we can be communicating with them through the spring, have it all locked in, in May before school ends, and then just do some follow-up over the summer. So if there is a way to identify someone within the city that can work with us, we'll go ahead and just put a moratorium on all other groups outside the city. So no, Cottonwood Heights organizations have until whatever, June to sign up, and then if there's still some left over, we'll go back and bring in the ones we have from before. So that's our ask. We want to involve as many city-based groups as we can, but need to have some type of deadline and direction to do it. So is that a reasonable?
That's a discussion we can have, I'm sure.
Great.
Another question I have for you, and I know we brought this up before. I know when I've done some major events in the city over the years, that the Slide Valley Convention and Visitors Bureau is able to do an economic analysis for certain types of event. Now, we're a little bit unique out here, I realize, without, we've got a couple hotels, kind of. So have you been able to formalize any economic benefit of all?
Yes, Visit Salt Lake actually performed one, it's either 2016 or 2017. The difficult part is they perform it on a county level. I did check in after, I think it was a year ago, after we had a meeting to see if there could be one done on a city-specific level. The quote I got was in the tens of thousands of dollars to perform it, and I said,
Yeah.
that may be a little bit difficult to do. But we have county data, just not city-specific.
Well, it is something we would want to try and work towards, that maybe there's another mechanism somewhere that can help us see what they're going to do. It's just good data to have.
The other thing to mention as well on this part, I don't think we brought it up before, but the launch team, which is the 501c3 nonprofit that kind of operate together with our races. It's a group that gets kids aged 8 to 18 running half marathons. We actually had 125 youth come out and participate. So those of you that were at the event, you probably saw them all in their shirts, but it was a pretty inspirational thing to see 125, some of them as young as 7 years old actually participating. And a
Full or
huge,
the half?
no, the half.
The half.
There were 2 of them that did the full, and that was beyond me, but a big chunk of that, one of the biggest teams, I think 30 some odd kids, meet here in Cottonwood Heights twice a week. It's a 12-week program. Most of them are from here, and they meet just over here in the city and do training runs and stuff like that. So that was another good thing that we added to this year.
So I know time is short because we're done, but any questions of Brooksy, and we'll be looking at.
No, I would probably just echo what you said about it. If there's, one of the consistent questions that we will get or complaints with is, what's the benefit of the city? So if you can, certainly we keep our eyes and ears and thoughts open on the way to maybe garner some of that information. Maybe somebody will have a great idea.
Well, I think we've mitigated a lot of those concerns just with your communication, with the business association, opening the road.
They may have
So that's usually a great process.
solution.
Well, and like I said, our preference is to have 100% of the groups that come out to volunteer be city-based. Because when it's folks that live here, first of all, it's less complaints because, oh, my neighbor, I know they were going out to volunteer, and so I'm gonna be a little bit more open to the event. But also, in terms of, when there's questions asked about traffic or whatever, it's just more people living here that know. And so again, we'll put a moratorium on accepting any groups until probably about June. And then until that time, if we could just work from someone in the city, Tim, and you can let us know who that is, we'll fill 100% of our needs with city-based groups, and then after that, we'll open it up to other folks.
Okay, thank you. We'll see you back in here.
Yeah,
Go
yep.
get something to eat and come back.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Go bum your Wi-Fi for an hour.
Yeah, all right. Carrie?
I apologize for the delay, folks. Thank you for your flexibility.
You weren't stuck with Highland Drive and Fort
No, I was stuck a little further north today, so coming back from Davis County, which means that my traffic problems were not in Cottonwood Heights at all.
That's right, yeah, thank you.
So we have, Tim sent along some input that we received from various council members, and I've just gone through and added some tracked changes to this draft. So nothing finalized yet, but we have made some changes since our last meeting, and I just want to open it up to discussion. No changes here on the first page or the second. On page 3, We had a suggestion that we cut Q business. So Cottonwood Heights has all the kinds of businesses I want it to have. I think if we remove that, it makes sense also to remove the follow-up question where we ask an open end about what kinds of businesses residents would like to see in the city. Open to discussion here, but that's the current suggestion. Is there particular value to this, or would it be better to cut that in people's eyes?
It's one we've asked in the past, right?
It is, yeah. I don't think we asked the follow-up in the past, but we did ask the what kinds of businesses.
I kind of like it.
Into that, then we'll read.
The language is the first one, we still try to keep the open-ended one.
Okay.
So,
And then down on page 4, we have some revisions to the trade-off considerations around the stormwater fee versus
Yeah, I had problems with that question.
addressing or reallocating existing funds. So that is at the bottom of page 4, sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you, yeah, that was my problem with that question.
So in, I think, reframing that initial statement, the suggestion was to just go ahead and cut the context altogether, which I'm afraid that stormwater is one of those things that residents think so little about that if we don't motivate the question somehow, the question that residents are going to have is why is the city considering adding or allocating more funds to stormwater and drainage?
And my
so-
concern is that that's not why.
Right, so that was mostly a placeholder for discussion. I think we need to motivate the decision though.
Yeah, see,
So-
I removed the whole first paragraph and just modified the second paragraph, but
That's what I did too. I
there's
think.
no reason.
So I think the suggestion was to just say the city is considering allocating more funds to the stormwater drainage system and related projects, and then move on to
Yeah, that's what I did. I
to
said
that
it
second
forward.
statement
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Please.
I'm looking at this on what Paula said.
Sorry,
This
this is an
version.
updated version.
I understand that. This is to Tim. So I'm looking at version 7, but I'm online, I see page 3 and then I see page 5.
Yeah, I had to go
7.
print it because I missed 2 copies when I printed
Oh.
it. You're right.
Is there a
There's 2 pages
couple
missing.
more?
Yeah,
Oh,
I did
sorry.
see that. You're right.
Okay. Sorry,
Yeah.
this was just an internal question.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I thought it was my printer.
So well, anyway, I
No, that's
apologize,
just-
I can't make any comments.
On your attachment to the thing.
So I think we could certainly just say that the city is considering allocating more funds, but I do think that saying, well, should the city reallocate existing funds or assess a fee without giving residents any motivation for that reallocation or new fee being assessed, we're gonna get some backlash there. So even if it's just a brief sentence explaining why, whether that's the stormwater and drainage system needs improvements and updates, or there's required maintenance, whatever that is, I do think we need to provide a little bit of context there.
I don't know, it says, in order to allocate funds, we'd rather see the city redistribute funds to the existing budget by reducing expenditures in other areas of the city. What would those other areas be? Police, fire, where would those funds come from? I mean, is that a statement that we can say yes? I mean, what avenue would that be? Because we don't wanna ask a question if we can't know the answer.
Yeah, I don't have an answer on what that would be. We'd have to,
That's what the council looked at.
we'd have to evaluate that in the budget.
And you're all.
My breath is that bad.
I mean, I can certainly see, it certainly helps change or inform your response if you understand where it might, what that really means. It's not just kind of this ethereal budget that we're taking money from. It really comes down to, it could be road projects. It could be other, public works stuff. It could be I mean, you
Police
pay
or
for
fire or anything else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so, well, yeah, how do you get that? I mean,
See, I kind of assumed that if I was answering that, you want me to raise taxes or do you just want to cut your budget and make it balance? That's why I looked at it.
Yep.
I hear what you're saying. some people say, I don't care what you do, but you're gonna raise my taxes.
Right.
We're saying whatever you have to do internally, it's your budget, you modify, you massage it, whatever you can, and you take care of my stormwater, but just not raise my taxes. Others saying, no, I'd rather not cut courtesy, if you have to raise my tax a little bit, and that's what they're saying. That's why I looked at it.
But I think you could add
Clarify.
a clarifier that says something like the city believes that the stormwater water system, I don't know how to phrase it, you phrased it better than I, but in need of repairs and maintenance.
Just the infrastructure.
You can find some people who can tell you what we're talking about.
So yeah, we can craft a little bit of a sentence up front there to say that, you know, the system is in need of repairs and maintenance. So the city's considering allocating additional funds. I think the second question that we're raising here is, do we need to specify or clarify? So I think our original question wording said that we would take reduce service levels for other services, and maybe that's not quite the accurate way to frame it, but it would reduce expenditures for other city services or in other areas. So that framing, we're not being particularly specific right now because it is sort of an assessment of increased taxes or use existing funds. That is the trade-off. Is that
right? I mean, the other option
yeah,
is fee.
yeah, use existing funds or assess a new fee.
Yeah, those
Are the two that were, yeah, not
Taxes.
taxes.
Fees.
Tax
Correct.
fees.
Can you scroll up just a teeny bit to get into page 5 a little bit?
Yeah, sorry, the response options are there at the top of page 5. Yeah, so use existing funds and reduce other expenditures, or assess a new stormwater fee and maintain current expenditure levels in other areas, would be those trade-offs. Are those response options that we feel comfortable with, or do we need to revise those to be more specific? I think if we don't have specifics, if we don't know what that would look like or where those funds would be reallocated from, this is the best way to phrase things, just to get a sense of whether residents are willing to pay for additional service and maintenance, or if they are passionate about the city reallocating the budget.
Sorry, explain to me again, because I was just reading why you changed it from services to expenditures.
That was,
You did.
yeah, that was suggested
Okay.
wording.
Can you, I
Yeah.
thought so, but.
Well, because your services kind of pigeonholes it to one set of ideas. You're talking about what you're gonna spend. And I just thought expenditures was more explicit.
It's more broad, while also, yeah, referring specifically to the budget rather than the outcomes, which,
Because, yeah, services is more narrow. Would be a capital item.
Yeah, I mean, it could be roads or.
Correct. It's not-
Can you do services and say services or expenditures?
yeah, we could certainly do that.
Yeah. Yeah, good point.
Here's my typo.
Fee.
The city of, how that
Oh, I thought it was
started.
of Cottonwood Heights. He of Cottonwood
He of Cottonwood Heights.
Yes. And of course, I just quickly plugged that in and trusted you too much,
Yeah, that was,
so.
not smart. We did it twice, which is even better,
Well, you
because
know.
I plugged it in myself once.
So we had some suggested revision to the renewable energy questions here, just to reflect city operations running on renewable energy by 2021 and citywide power moving to renewable energy resources by 2030. But otherwise, these questions are the same.
And that's basically, it's either has no effect on you, you save money, or it costs you more.
Correct.
And they randomly get one of the 3.
Yes.
No, they get all three.
No, our setup here would
Oh.
suggest that they only see one of the 3. So we're not asking residents to evaluate each of the 3, which is why I didn't cut the third option yet. I marked it as a suggested
one of
cut,
these
but,
3.
yeah,
Oh,
so
I
residents would
understand
only
the
answer
third
one of the 3 questions.
Oh, I didn't.
Depending on to answer the first one or no?
No, just they are randomly assigned to one of the 3, so a third of the sample would answer and see if it cost the city more or if it resulted in no additional cost. or if it resulted in savings. And that allows us to test rather than explicit preferences where residents say, well, of course, if it doesn't cost the city additional money, or if it saves us money, but not if it increases costs. Instead, we're just asking them to evaluate one outcome. So we can get sort of an up or down on one scenario and then make comparisons between those randomized subsets, assuming all else is equal because we're using random assignment to determine which question they answer. We can make those comparisons, and if there's a statistical difference in the responses, then we would have a good sense of varying support levels. But respondents only have to answer one question about the proposal.
I didn't understand that, but I did eliminate in what I suggested, the third question, which is one that I can't envision anyone saying no to.
Would result in a savings?
If you could have clean energy and it would be a savings, would you oppose that? Oh, yeah, well, I mean, just no one's gonna say that. So I think that's 100%, unless you're trying to gauge intelligence, but.
I guess I'm still trying to understand, when we get the answers to this, how as a city manager, how are you using this information? Or is it gonna change the direction we're going? Because we don't necessarily, most people, to Mike's comment, if there's a saving or it's the same, we'll probably say yes.
Absolutely.
But we won't know that until we actually do the studies and go through the process to determine that. So how does this influence what staff will do?
Well, as we are working with Rocky Mountain Power,
Yep.
and they're gonna be doing an evaluation of costs related to not just our city, but others, we're gonna have to determine eventually the opt-in, opt-out of this per HB 411.
Well, people, you have to, everybody's in unless they opt out.
Yeah. So what this,
So there's,
It's
people
the
will
city
have.
being in or out, though, that, not individuals.
Well, individuals, people can choose, right? You can choose to
Yes.
opt out. So if we move forward, people can opt out, right? And in 10 years from now, people have more information, right? So help me understand how this, I still don't get like the necessity of this response and how that's gonna influence what we're doing, just from a practical perspective.
I think it's just having information on what the potential would be on people opting in or opting out and interest in this is how I would answer that. I mean, it'll just give us more information as we're working through the information with Rocky Mountain Power on where our residents are on this issue related to opting in or opting out.
If we've got a really strong response to even if it costs me more, I think this is important. You know, if that came, that would definitely gauge my tolerance level going forward. It was like, yeah, the thing, we got 75% of people said they're willing to pay for this even if it costs them a little bit more money. That's different than say we got a 25% response there, and how much or how aggressively we may want to move forward.
Especially when we go into the budget process and we start allocating money for sustainability, for more research or more strong
like-
enforcement.
Again, I think it's a valuable thing to see where the public stands, even if it costs me more, do I still want it? I would like to know the same thing about recyclable. I would like to know the same thing about police services. If it costs us more, you still want in-house police, how much more are you willing to spend than our neighbors? As we get to the apples and apples that we're gonna do this next budget year, how much more are people willing to spend? But I think we need to cover all the bases, it can't just be,
Well, this isn't saying how much more.
well, if
It's
it
saying, are you
ends
willing?
up costing more,
Only because we
are you
have a
still gonna opt in?
See, because where we have a resolution, we've already made the decision to go in that direction.
But we have not made the decision whether we're going to opt in.
Right.
And the city has to still choose
Yeah.
along the process if the city opts in.
Yeah, but regardless, I mean, I think we can all say with logic, if we determine that working through Rocky Mountain Power Solar Subscriber Program is gonna be equal to what we're paying, we're gonna do it, right? If we find out that in 2 years from now, solar panels have taken a strong decrease and it's equal, we're gonna do it, right? And those are the questions we're asking here. I
No.
think we already know the answers. If
I
it's
think-
less money, we're gonna do it, but we're not gonna have that information until we actually do it,
The
right?
question here though is,
Do the study. Is this influencing whether we do a study for the resolution?
the question here though is,
No.
if it's
I don't
more,
get it.
if it's going to cost residents more to go this route, then should we still do it?
Right, but I guess my inherent issue with this, similar to Tally's, is we don't do that with every decision we make. Why are we so it seems like there's a reticence or a worry
So are you
or a concern. I guess it just seems, I don't understand it. If it's more, I think as a council, whoever is here is gonna make the decision in the budget, if it makes sense.
You can say that about every one of these questions. You'd have to eliminate questions about all kinds of things, if that's the perspective you take though. Why ask about dog parks? Why ask
We're
about?
not, I think those were not, well, maybe because I'm missing that page.
Why ask about all kinds of things?
Just a preference.
Because we're trying to see what the public says, feels, what they care about, what their priorities are.
Well, the public doesn't know there'd be a premium for in-house police.
Neither do you.
We don't know that.
You don't know that either.
Back of the napkin, I have a really good idea. And,
On the back of the napkin says different.
well,
That's what I said, we gotta, so would you rather not have these on here?
I guess I was just trying to understand what that information was telling us that would direct us to do something different, or if we're just still gonna do the same thing. I guess I was just trying to understand what the purpose was, just a philosophical question. And if Mike's answer is what everybody else thinks, then that's fine. I just wondered what,
like we're
how
trying to
it
be
changes.
overly zealous on sustainability and letting other areas of the budget will be untouchable, say greenhouse.
Well, I just think that we're starting in a whole new process with Rocky Mountain Power and we've approved our resolution to move forward with that. There's gonna be decisions on putting forward funding towards that. I just think this gives us a gauge on where, once again, just information on where the residents are on this issue related to this. We're moving forward with that with Rocky Mountain Power. We're gonna start, we've already started that negotiation process, or will be into that. That's not changing this, it just helps us gauge where the residents are on this issue. There's nothing beyond that in the intent of this. I just thought it would be important for us to see what residents feel on the matter. It's up to you on whether you wanna move forward with it or not. That's,
Okay,
But I mean, part of this is deciding what questions we're gonna ask.
To me, again, I think the third of those questions
If
is not
that,
very useful.
yeah, if that feels like a no-brainer, then we could remove condition 3, but I do think the randomized experiment between costs and savings, or costs and no costs, is valuable, so.
Move on?
But let's not say he said, he of Cottonwood.
Yeah, I've changed that on my version, so.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I should have proofread your suggestions better. Okay, so then on the next page here, a couple changes to the questions about enforcement and public safety. So this first one here, rather than saying the Cottonwood Heights Police Department, the suggestion was just to say Cottonwood Heights is to assertive on code or ordinance enforcement. And I think the concept here is like a lot of people don't think about the police department being the agency that enforces those ordinances or codes, whether that's the case or not. And then we've changed the word committed to equipped in Q threats. So rather than saying the police department is committed, no one's questioning their commitment, we're questioning whether they are equipped to address the issues that pose the biggest threats to the safety of the community. Any pushback there? Any other thoughts? That's all for that page. Moving on to the next page here, just a little bit of wording adjustment to the events question. So we've added plays and musical productions rather than just the Arts Council City play. Okay. We've added beautification of Fort Union Boulevard to the potential projects for budget allocation.
What does that mean?
You mean, what does beautification mean?
Exactly.
Oh, I see.
Get rid of some of those power
Landscaping.
lines.
Oh, you better have a lot of people who have $100.
Beautification.
You could do it in the future. You could do it in the
Beautification,
future.
I don't know,
We should be doing that in the future.
yeah, okay, I mean, that's so
This
nebulous.
is similar to what we asked before.
Yep, yep, otherwise I think that list is pretty comparable. We've added a couple other things that were of interest this year.
Okay.
And then our next section, we had some revisions to the street evaluations and improvements. So rather than traffic is too fast, just cars speeding through my neighborhood is a significant problem, or it's not a significant problem. The same change would apply to main city streets. So cars speeding on main city streets is or is not a significant problem. And then on the road maintenance question here, streets in my neighborhood are in good condition or in poor condition, rather than are well maintained or not well maintained. And the same would apply for.
So each one of these questions have a slider, they can just move up and down, is that what that is?
Yep, that would be, each of these statements are positioned on either end of the scale, and they can move the slider to the position that best reflects their preference or their view. And then the next question here, we just made a couple changes to the bike lanes wording. So rather than just eliminating on-street parking, it could eliminate on-street parking or reduce travel lanes for vehicles. Sorry, that one's on page 10. The next change on page 11, there's a suggestion to add a question about the park that residents visit most frequently. So would you be in favor of fencing off a part of the park that you visit most frequently and dedicating a portion of that park to be off-leash for dogs? Or off-leash dog park. And that was just a simple yes or no question. We could ask a scale of support or opposition, but I think frankly, when we do the analysis, we would condense it down to a yes or no anyway. So, and then
Well, wait a minute.
Go ahead.
though,
Yep.
but would you be in favor of fencing off a part of, we're not saying which part?
So it would be the park that
one
they
they
select.
visit
Yes.
most
often.
Oh,
Yes. So it's
So
the
it kinda
park that
self-
they
yeah, because.
visit
Okay.
most frequently.
Polices to being whichever one they go to.
Yeah.
Yep. The next change, we added an other please specify option for amenities and improvements in the park that they would like to see improvements to. So that's just an additional option on that list. And after that, I think the only other change is we added a prefer not to say option in our ethnicity question in the demographic section.
That's good.
Any other thoughts or comments, things that we should incorporate? I think we're about final, unless there's further revision based on anything we've discussed.
No, there's one question I didn't like, but
Okay.
I noticed that it was on our last one, I think it'd be good to have the comparison.
Okay.
It was when we asked a question about the mayor and the council.
Okay.
We asked the question totally differently than how we asked about the city manager and the staff. It's different, I mean,
And that's the way we have previously asked.
yeah, that's why you gotta leave it the same, yeah. So that was a question I had, but when I look back at the old survey in 2016, I can see it's good to have that comparison. Otherwise, I would have rephrased one about the mayor and the council, to do it the same way we do about the city administration. Yeah.
Got it. So, when we're talking about the city administration, do you mean the section where we ask about their experience with city services or if they've contacted the city?
No,
Or-
right up
okay.
front. It's
Right up
early on.
front.
For
How
the
would you
approve or disapprove of the elected officials' jobs, correct?
Well, no, that's two different things. One you ask about the mayor and council, and
Mhm.
it's simply you approve or, you
Mhm.
know. Well, like you asked in your view, how much of the time do you kind of like city administrators and
Oh, okay.
staff? I would have done it the same way with the mayor and council,
Got it.
but it's two separate questions asking kind of the same.
Yeah, that trust section was a new addition this year, and
Yeah.
we asked the sort of job
So I'm
approval
fine
question
with
for
it
you.
because I think it's a good comparison because of the 2016,
Okay.
but pull it out of it.
Yeah, one other thing, we talked about last time, there was the suggestion about this portion of the survey, it would be a random, selection scientific survey process. I talked with Kyrene after, we talked last time about having an open access component of this afterwards, which basically means, correct me if I'm wrong, it would be online or in some form, and people could just respond to that, in a set amount of time.
Yeah, so we would provide the city with an anonymous link that could be distributed via social media, on the city website, whatever communication channels you like, that would allow any interested residents to complete the survey.
The same survey.
The same survey. And that just enables anyone who wasn't selected for the scientific sample to still be able to contribute. And then once we've released the results from the scientific sample, that also allows them to compare their responses that they've provided to the city to the results that are reflective of the population at large.
So there's a cost to that. It's $500 to administer it, $1.50 per survey interview that comes in. As I've mentioned before, I am concerned about that data and how biased it would be, but that's the option. We need your direction. It would cost more, but not a substantial amount. We can even cap the number of responses, but we need direction on that, because that's what we talked about, so.
There's no way to make it balanced, right? There's no way to say
No,
it's representative of something. There's no way to say necessarily even that it was taken by a resident.
We can, we're relying on the honor system. So
So-
if they said they lived in Cottonwood Heights, or if they entered a zip code within Cottonwood Heights city boundaries, then they would be allowed to proceed in the survey.
If they're not, they could take it over and over, couldn't they, potentially?
We can limit the survey so that they can only access the survey once, but that is based on an IP address. So if someone tries to take it from a public computer, that's not a perfect system.
So they could
So
potentially do that.
so either we limit it and it can only really be taken from a private device, or if we make it so that, you know, if someone came to a city office or the library or the rec center and tried to take the survey there and someone else wanted to do the same thing, then we would have to allow people to take the survey multiple times.
And if you filter by IP, two people on the same computer at home, for example,
Right.
could not do it.
Right. That's true as well.
And the decision to do that, we can decide at any time. It's not a,
Yeah, that's not a pressing decision. That's not gonna hold up our process here. But that's just an option for your consideration.
You know, I think we're missing a really valuable window. As we do our apples to apples comparison, if it turns out that we're spending more than 10% more than our neighbors, 20% more than our neighbors, is it still, do we want in-house police regardless?
my position on that, to be honest with you, is that's a budget question. It's
So
more.
it's sustainability. When we get the public an opportunity to weigh in, I feel like they're being deceived and we're not being transparent and giving them the opportunity. Because we've never done apples to apples, but if and when we do,
What's apples to apples?
it's our best effort to compare what we're spending in that department versus our neighbors.
But I don't have that data to show me that there's an inconsistency. I don't know of any study that compares apples to apples with police that allows me comfort level to put that out anywhere. Doesn't mean somewhere we don't wanna do it. If the budget committee wants to look at some of these things, I'm all for that. But at this time, I'm not hearing anyone tell me that it's not, that it's out of line, that it's premium. I hear what you're saying. I know we discussed it.
I mean, Scott's our budget director.
Right.
And he has a pretty good handle. I mean, we haven't ironed it out and we haven't come to a consensus of how we're gonna assign every little dollar.
Right.
But Scott, is it fair to say we pay something of a premium compared to Holiday?
We had to have figured out, when you decided to have an in-house police force, study to make that determination.
It was, and Cottonwood
Right,
said
so
they
I
could
think,
do it cheaper.
right, I mean, so if
That's not
you did it
what I
once,
said.
you should be able to do the reverse.
Yeah, I'm not
right?
saying,
That's
I'm
not
not
what
saying.
happened.
I think
That's
it's
not what
worthy
was
to
said.
figure it out.
No,
I don't think that's.
I say get figured out and get the numbers, but to throw it on a survey before I see what the comparables are, because I would do
But
it.
we're missing a window.
What we
We're
have
doing this
done-
survey, if it turns out that apples to apples, we're paying 10% more, 20% more, 30% more, the public should have some say. Yes, it's worth it to us. We
Okay.
wanna pay no matter what,
To an
like
extent,
recyclables.
The
I wanna keep
public has said that,
recycling
and you're
even
ignoring
if-
it, and you've continued to ignore it,
The
time and time.
public-
The public has said,
The public
on
has
each and
fantasies.
every single one of these surveys that we have done from the beginning, they have said over and over and over what they think of our police, that they like.
This isn't questioning their job, they're doing a
It's-
fantastic job, we have
Yeah.
fantastic officers, it's not questioning
Yeah.
their job performance.
I'm gonna go back to the point that I think there's agreement that we should know what the costs are. We should know what we should know.
And we should disclose it to the
Well,
public,
what,
it's their
absolutely.
dollars.
And
And
we should
we
know what
have.
the direct costs are and what the indirect costs are. When Scott is ready to create that formula that we can approve to allocate the cost, and I think we look at those numbers and proceed. I'm not personally comfortable, and if everybody disagrees, I'll go with the majority, but I'm not ready to, say that we've seen those numbers and that they say it's a premium. I haven't seen that.
I think there's another challenge, which is we might be able to identify, and we should,
Yes.
identify what those costs are for us. But you have to realize that the project is not a trivial effort.
I agree with that. Where you have different accounting systems in Murray, Sandy, even UFA, other locations, it is an in-depth it's an in-depth evaluation
But
that
I
will
think
take
we
a
can
lot
get,
of time.
but I think
Not
we can get a
saying-
good understanding. I agree.
Of where we are.
Yeah, but I think too, with someone who has expertise, I think you can get a close comparison. Not exact, it'll never be exact. I spent 20 years in indirect costs of accounting. It is. It's a tough job. If the budget committee with Scott, we want to get those costs, and then once we have those true costs, we want to look at some, I'm
But
all
we're
for it.
missing a window of time to engage the public, unless we
I
wanna
don't
keep
think-
this survey in a year.
Can we go back to those questions where we asked about,
They really,
Police.
they use the same.
about police though, I mean,
And those are dissimilar from what we've asked in the past. And so those will show, I mean, those will show.
Remember what
over
page those
time.
are on, Kyrene?
The police questions are on page 6.
6, okay.
I don't have that.
That's one.
And those questions have been on each of our surveys because it's always been at the forefront of the conservative council to know what people feel.
These are all
They're getting-
performance related, which I think without question, they get an A.
When it comes to the budget, that's our responsibility as a council. And until I have data for me, I don't,
I just find it interesting that we want the public's opinion on certain things, but not everything.
Well, if we're gonna evaluate, you can evaluate every department of our whole administration, which I'll tell you from a personnel morale standpoint, if we're evaluating whether to outsource or not, that frustrates me significantly and impacts morale in a way that I'm not happy even
I just
going
feel
on.
like
Well,
we've gotta run this a little bit like a business. We've gotta be a little bit accountable to our stockholders. We don't just get to take their taxes and then spend through the roof and say, oh, we're not gonna talk about budgets because it might hurt morale.
I look at it as.
That's
you-
never the case in a
You always wanna
business.
be transparent
In
and
a private
efficient
business,
in
that's
government,
never
but
the
this is,
case.
but this is not a private business. Government is never a private business. There's
But you've
different
got to be
implications.
accountable to those
There's
dollars.
different implications for the services we provide than a private
It's offensive to me
business.
that we just spend and don't disclose.
And we do
There's not what we
disclose.
disclose
And
everything.
That's offensive to me that you'd even say that.
What's not
Well,
disclosed?
yeah, what's not disclosed? Which part of our budget is hidden?
We commingle our funds and then we say we
Commingle
can't
with
give you an
commingle.
accurate amount, how much we attribute to police, or how much we accurately attribute here or there. That's deceptive, and I don't buy it. And to say that
Governmental
we have to
account,
count.
state law establishes governmental accounting, we follow those practices. Indirect cost allocation is something that's above and beyond governmental accounting. I agree with you, we need to do that, we've agreed that's the direction we're gonna go, to have a more direct thing, and we have someone who I think has a background, can help us do that. And that's what we're doing.
You took something of a stab at it last budget disclosure, and you guys all threw it out the window and said, we haven't agreed that that could be disclosed.
We hadn't agreed on the methodology, that's the issue, and there's multiple methodologies in looking at that. You can't just select one, and we did not agree on the methodology, and that's where we were
I
at.
mean, discussed it.
But conceptually, I agree, we should know the direct cost of every program, every department.
We should.
Yep, we should, and it should be transparent, it should be public, we shouldn't hide it, absolutely. Then if we want to take that data and compare it, I'm all for it. Then we can decide, do we want to pay a higher premium? If it's a choice or it's not a choice, then I think that, the only thing that I'm disagreeing with is, I think it's premature now to throw that into a survey without an understanding of what our strategies have
We're
been.
throwing in sustainability, and we have no idea what HB 411 is gonna evolve into. We have no idea
Well,
what
let's-
Rocky Mountain Power is
So
gonna
you
do.
want to take sustainability out?
No, I wanna leave it in, and I wanna add.
So you wanna say,
Let's
if
keep asking.
police services cost more, would you be in favor? If police services cost less, would you be in
Do
favor?
you wanna keep in-house police even if it comes at a premium? Yes or no? How much of a premium? A
And
little
would-
bit?
and do you
Lot?
wanna keep them if they come at a discount, yes or no?
Sure.
If you-
We asked that on
Are we gonna
sustainability.
do that for
We-
every single
we
department?
have the
I asked the
question.
question, I
No.
I'm not
I'm
just
with
crazy,
you.
arguing
It's
with you.
like sustainability, when you said if it's cheaper, are you gonna want it? Of course
We do.
people are. I think.
We do have the option, and one of the nice things about
Yeah, I hear what you're
YQK
saying.
Analytics is we can do a separate survey
Yeah.
in 3 months with the same batch, and it comes out a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
So we can certainly have the discussion there.
I cannot argue, we want to know our direct costs. Absolutely. Without any question about that, and once we do that, I work through that, and I create a methodology and make that happen, I'm more than comfortable with that. I don't have any opposition to that whatsoever. I have the opposition I have throwing on a survey right now without an understanding of where we are in the strategy and looking at that. I'm uncomfortable.
Well,
If
we've
you
not
feel-
been fully transparent for 13 years,
That is a
so-
complete and total load of crap.
Is it?
You've been told,
Is it?
you just refused it. Well, okay, I'm going
Are
off.
you gonna break it down for me line by line?
No, I'm gonna go break it off of the professionals that have said, the way you do your budgeting is good, in fact, it's award-winning, and they have consistently said that for over 12 years. And so, if I'm gonna trust them, the ones who know what they're doing, or you, yeah, that's pretty easy. So, let's move on to the next subject.
Well, but again,
That's
I'm
okay.
totally supportive of understanding and knowing what our direct costs and indirect costs are for every program. I cannot,
That's all I
absolutely.
ask, I wanna know those costs, and I'm.
What I thought,
Day one.
what I thought we would, the next
We
budget.
should.
It
Yeah,
sounds like
We absolutely should.
consensus, we should be directing Tim and the team to.
yeah, he knows that. Yeah, we've done that.
Can we set a goal date?
Well,
It's gonna be in the budget
upcoming
process.
budget process, the committee will look at that and we'll ask reports back regularly, absolutely. Yeah. That's why I thought we would, is that in this next budget cycle, we would have those direct costs and indirect costs, and the allocation of those based upon a formula we agree on.
And how do we get to this question, you keep mentioning, Tim, methodology, we haven't agreed on it, who is agreeing to it, and how will we agree to it?
When is the question gonna be asked?
What we
Yeah.
will do is there are differing methodologies, we'll have that information to explain to you, and you can select
Well,
which
Scott,
methodology. we
my
look at.
understanding is Scott will present to us a methodology that he sees would be appropriate. And there'll be some areas that are tough. When I did this before, it's really hard. It's like taking receptions to the front desk. Okay, you take a percentage of that person's salary and start breaking it out to different programs. Some organizations have tried to do that, others found that it's just so time consuming, it's not cost
I
benefit
think
to
you
do
can
it.
make it a close approximation on those items.
Or you say, wait a minute, that's an administrative template, we just have to determine on some of those gray areas. The majority of the areas, I think, are quite clear.
And what our team has done, kudos to them for the IT system that they've installed,
Yeah.
and we're starting to assign that IT services to departments, kudos. good job.
Yeah, one of those things so I think what would happen is, with Scott, under direction of Tim, will come up with a formula and tell us how we want to do it. Goes
Is
to
it
the
just
team.
going us, or is it going to the full council?
We'll go to full council, but I think the committee hopefully will do the first vetting of it. So you see that, then eventually comes to us, so we understand because of the issues they have.
That's how I would look at it.
Yeah, yeah. that's my understanding, that's where we're going. So and I support that.
But keep in mind, this isn't for one department,
Welcome
this
to our
is for every
living room.
department.
It's every department, absolutely, good clarification.
It's for every department.
And you can do all that in this budget session, every department. I mean, is that realistic?
Scott and I are gonna have to talk, it's gonna be a haul.
That's a big ask.
But I think
You get pretty close.
I'll speak for me.
You get pretty close.
I felt like we would be further along in that process than we are now, and I hope that we can get further along into the next budget year. I hope we can.
Because we're so heavy budget-wise on salaries and personnel, which is a big part of that, that part is pretty clear. Yeah, it's those other areas that we just need to, and I think we can get pretty close. I personally, I don't know, Scott, speak, thoughts? We're talking about you, and you feel free to, we gotta move on quickly.
There's a lot of different allocation methods. We have a lot of costs that can fluctuate greatly, such as our capital costs, and that's one of the big ones, is how do you allocate capital? Do you let it fluctuate as the costs change, such as when you build this building, you could have a huge amount of overheads shift over to the buildings, and then the next year it shifts back to general operations. Some of those things are the things that have to be discussed to try and determine what's an appropriate allocation method, because I know in Salt Lake County, if they have large, projects such as the Salt Palace expansion, there was huge allocations that went over to Salt Palace expansion, and then it came back the next year into the general operations. And so, do you want it to do that? Do you not want it to do that?
See, and
There's
I'd have
100 different
a
ways you can look at it.
position that I would not include those type of capital in my comparisons.
But at the same time, capital takes a huge amount
Those
of
type of
staff
capital,
time
those type of
to
capital,
do.
when
Yeah.
it's a major construction project,
Yeah.
other capital like equipment, supplies, absolutely.
To me, the challenge is what you're trying to use it to determine, and if you're trying to compare to something else that is loaded with those capital costs, then you have to load it. And so, the target of its use is the critical question when you decide which methodology.
Well, it's not just the use, it's what do you wanna know?
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
What are you gonna?
Well, no, you wanna
use-
know what your cost is.
But if you wanna know what it is
My first-
relative to something else,
Yeah.
you have to
Right.
try to match
I hear you.
something else.
My first thing is, you just wanna know what is the cost
Okay.
of every department.
And-
John,
and
it's
sometimes
not
more
the
than
square
department.
footage in the building, I mean, that's a given.
No, actually you don't,
Why not? I don't understand that.
but not everybody does. And if you're doing what Mike's saying, is you're looking to compare something directly with a neighbor or somewhere else, and they're not doing that, then you shouldn't do that if you're comparing your costs.
Yeah, but if their costs are gonna include that,
If,
naturally
if,
in there,
but
you're
that's,
not
that-
gonna-
but that was my point in my last email. They don't all, and if you're using that to inflate yours in comparison to someone else's, that's not right either.
A lot of the heavy lifting is gonna be the comparisons and getting the data and.
But
and
you,
being
but what you,
apples to apples there.
what you can do is you can create your cost, and then you can have more than one number. Cost with this.
We can
or
take
the
a few
other.
methodologies and
Yeah.
compare them, we can have medians, we can have averages.
Yeah, and over the years in county, we changed as we
abandon
went
vehicles
along,
instead of abandoned
because
cars.
we found out some things were so flexible, but I hear you. We didn't do wrong, but
Because
we
people
are
abandon
committed to
motorcycles and
those
stuff all the
costs.
time.
Probably
But I would like input on
be
whether you want us to,
Four-wheelers.
and I
Four-wheelers,
guess we don't
vans,
need to do this
snowmobile,
now,
whatever.
Yeah.
whether you want us to, on the survey, open it up, because
Yeah.
there is a cost to that, open it up in this open survey.
To me, the bigger cost is the confusion you create by having a survey that is not scientific and one that is. And the one that's not scientific is by its nature biased. And the way it's biased is hard to compute, because you don't know, you just know that it is, and it is probably in some ways. So to me, the cost is having information that might well be misleading. If only people from my neighborhood respond, it's gonna be a very different outcome than if only people in your neighborhood respond. So,
My
that's why I'm
understanding-
not in favor.
My understanding was we were gonna do this now, we would get the data, and we were maintaining the option to do that if we felt we wanted to. But I don't think we even have that direction tonight.
Well, I guess I I guess I would say if we're moving towards just a scientifically, just on the survey based on scientifically blah, 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 then I think we as a city need to have a response for that. When somebody calls or when we post the results, which I assume we will do.
Absolutely.
And
Have a
just
presentation.
have a good response and have it clear on the website and be able to take people's feedback who didn't have a chance to provide it and not expect them to have to come to City Hall. I mean, I guess.
Well, I'm saying we're still leaving the door open to do that additionally, if we want. I mean, if you all read through now, I assume we were doing this one now, and then we'll have results in 30 days, less?
Probably about 3 weeks. Our goal is to wrap up fielding before the Thanksgiving holiday, and then
Yeah.
we would conclude analysis shortly thereafter.
We have analysis, it's there, then if we feel we want to open that up, if there's a need for whatever reason, I think it's still open with what costing you have to do it.
But I agree, we could also do something in the middle of that, which is create, here are the questions we ask people, and we're interested to hear your feedback. If you wanna tell us what you think, we're interested to hear what you have to say. It's not a survey, but it's a, organized feedback mechanism.
Well, we can certainly look at options for that as well. I think the costs would be similar, because just the cost of, frankly, of our collecting the data, that has an inherent cost to our software providers. But we could provide a similar outlet. That's just a sort of an open-end comment box, or I'm sure the city website has some sort of just comment box facilitation that we could certainly work with. Happy to provide a middle ground if that's helpful.
So the timing of that would be when you usually?
That would be after, our recommendation was that it would be after the scientific
That's
survey
right.
results are publicized.
Yeah, okay. Well, when you come back and we'll talk about doing that, and I'm fine with
And the
that.
target is to have these results prior to our retreat.
Okay, all right, we gotta move on.
Thank you.
Staff reports, Mike, affordable housing.
Yeah, Tim, you mind? Okay, so, this item is the state required update of the affordable housing element of the general plan. Keep going, next slide. Just a bit of background, this is prompted by SB 34 of the past legislative session that was put into effect as of May. It requires cities now to adopt moderate income housing elements in their general plans. I'll note that we have had one. We last adopted our update in 2017. Prior to SB 34, our requirement from the Department of Workforce Services would have been to update this in 2023. However, this legislation implemented various changes that required us to update this this year. Us, along with probably, I don't know this for a fact, but almost every other city in Utah is probably in the same boat.
It's due by December 1st, right?
Yes, yes. Back up one more, sorry. So, again, just some general purpose statements, but this legislation works towards providing a diverse range of housing for all income levels, and specifically addresses current projected housing shortage as the population continues to grow. Something that's slightly more defined than it used to be is that each affordable housing plan must now include a minimum of 3 strategies to achieve that goal written there above. The legislation actually provides a menu of 22 different strategies that cities can choose from, and they have to choose at least 3, and then they're required to report on those on an annual basis, progress towards achieving those goals. And the deadline imposed by this legislation is that these updated plans must be adopted no later than December 1st, 2019. So just a summary of the required changes implemented by this legislation. Cities must now facilitate the opportunity for a variety of housing types to fit the needs of renters and homeowners, including those 3 things there. So meeting the needs of people living and working, or desiring to live and work in the community, and people of various income levels. Allowing people with various incomes to benefit from and participate in all aspects of neighborhood and community life. and then strategically address how cities will provide a realistic opportunity for the development of moderate income housing within 5 years. There's some changes to the ongoing reporting of the affordable housing plan as well. Previously, you needed to update your housing and demographic data, your inventory of housing in the various ranges of affordability every 2 years. And that was all you had to do, just update the numbers and submit it, and then update the plan, I believe, every 5 years. Now will be required to review and report annually on the following items here. So a revised estimate of the need of moderate income housing in the next 5 years. So that's all the demographic data you see in the draft report there. So the availability of housing affordability in the different bands, the percent renter versus owner, the demographics, the population information, et cetera. We also have to report on the description of progress made in updating our housing stock with each cost bracket. So the brackets are called bands. They're affordability bands. Median income housing is 80% of area median income or less. But then they have very low income, which is 50% or less, and extremely low income, which is 30% or less. And then we also have to develop a plan to utilize community reinvestment strategies to effectively use modern income housing set aside from the CDRA. This is already a requirement for any new community reinvestment area, is a moderate income housing side set aside. So we'll be required to do this as we prepare the CRA plans for the 2 areas in the city we're working on. And then we just have to report on the progress each year. Okay, I'm not going to go through all these, but this is the menu, the next 2 slides. So it's a broad list of options that have been defined by the state as...
These are the SB 34 list?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
As the menu of goals that cities must choose at least 3 of and work towards implementation. I've highlighted 3 here. You can read through the other ones, but I'll touch on the 3 that... It's on the next page. This is only half of the menu here. The other half's on the next
Well, it
page.
was so small, I figured you figured
It was
out.
really small when I put them all on one slide. Yeah, so this is the second half. So we'll go back for a second. But you can see the range of options here. This caters to every city in Utah, and every city is just a little different. So there's some options of, allowing certain housing or reduction in parking when you're near major transit facilities, things like that.
The ADU questions on there.
Accessory dwelling units is one. General fund subsidies, creating subsidized programs to assist in the development or location of individuals in affordable housing. The 3 we've chosen, well, the first one is allow for higher density or modern income residential development in commercial and mixed use zones, commercial centers, or employment centers. This was chosen because our mixed use ordinance, which is the predominant land use along Fort Union Boulevard and the future land use along Fort Union, already allows for residential housing at a permitted density of 35 units per acre. And because that's our long range designation along Fort Union at sites like Canyon Center and other development sites, the long range plan is to implement mixed use zoning and mixed use development, which includes that option for higher density residential development in those areas. So this is one that as properties continue to redevelop and seek rezones in accordance with the general plan, we will see progress on this likely just as a matter of what's in the ordinance and what's in the general plan.
So this applies especially at the gravel pit?
Well, the gravel pit, I think the next one more applies to the gravel pit. This is going to be predominantly along Fort Union Boulevard because all the redevelopment we see along there, the long range land
That's what I
use.
was saying, the PDD area.
Right. So the next goal is implement zoning incentives for low to moderate income housing units in new developments. Anyone utilizing the planned development district is required, if they have residential housing, to provide 10% of those units at a 50% area median income affordability band, which is actually very low income rather than just affordable. So that 10% housing requirement in planned development district areas actually really helps us achieve the housing shortage that every city is facing here.
But in strategy 2,
Mhm.
in the language in here, and maybe it's just me, it refers to developer incentives.
I think
That
that's,
language bothers me.
That's viewing the plan development district itself as an incentive, but that's what this goal says is zoning incentives. The incentive being, the plan development district allows for the potential of much denser, much higher density development than is possible under standard zoning. One of the trade-offs is that they have to provide 10% of their housing at 50% area median income.
I'm just saying to the lay citizen, just that, starting out with that as your first two words in that strategy.
And I think we can work that language a little. What page is that on?
It's just on the, plans to meet affordable housing, it's talking about your three strategies.
Okay.
Will it say developer incentive or zoning incentive?
Well, it says zoning incentive, that's
But then it
the
falls, so
language.
it defines it as developed.
We can rewrite that.
Zoning incentive.
Yeah, I would just.
That's an easy change, but that's the intent.
The public doesn't like that,
Yeah, that's.
the sound of that.
And I just-
That is one of the trade-offs of a developer choosing to
I hear
apply
you. No,
for
it's
condos.
just wordsmithing a little bit.
We can do
I
that.
think, especially with the lay citizen.
Yep, that's easy. So you can see the other strategies there. Let's go to the next slide. A lot of this is partnering with other entities that provide, tax incentives or funding assistance or things like that. But the third goal we chose, because it's very timely, is utilizing a moderate income housing set aside from a community reinvestment agency, redevelopment agency, or community development and renewal agency. Because we're in the process of creating two community reinvestment areas, we will have that moderate income housing set aside and hope to be
You
able
mean
to
set
report
aside,
on
you're
this.
talking about a funding stream that will be used towards something.
It's a required funding stream in these CRA areas, required, that would be set aside for
The 10%.
projects within, well, depends, 20, depending upon the plan, 10% or 20, but there's differing
It's-
elements of that.
Yeah, that's the percentage of the tax
Tax
increment
tax
generated.
increment
Yeah.
generated.
I
The
agree.
PDD is the
10.
10% of the units. Oh, so,
10% goes to housing set aside.
We're talking about here, the funding that comes from community reinvestment agencies. There's a
Right.
set aside amount of the tax increment, a
Right.
percentage.
10%. I've never heard 20% would be set aside for housing.
I don't know what the requirement is.
There's two different elements, 10% and 20%, but it's all negotiated in interlocal agreements,
Yeah.
so. Most of the time it's 20%.
I've never heard 20%, that's why I'm asking the
Yeah.
question. Help me understand where,
It used to be 20% when there was, I'll be brief, CDAs, URAs, and EDAs. There was a 20% requirement initially in URAs and CDAs. It was reduced in EDAs, Economic Development Area, where you're recruiting for jobs. It was reduced to 10%. Now it's negotiated in the CRA
at a minimum
somewhere
of
between
10%.
10 to 20%.
So,
Okay.
Most of the time, the county requires 20%. I've seen argument after argument where they say it's gotta be 20 or nothing.
who makes that determination?
Well, it's the negotiation between the taxing entities and us in the interlocal agreement that we have to agree to.
It's all of the taxing entities
Right.
have to agree to it, is the bottom line.
But if we wanted to, well.
So
if we
it
wanted-
may
we wanted
very,
to-
it may very well be 20% for the county, and the school district said, well, for us to participate, it needs to be 10, because these are units that we may have to retain more of our income
I
for
agree
students.
Most of the time,
Completely.
they require an alignment of everyone, but you could negotiate different for.
Or they just need to go.
But as a goal, we feel that that's reasonable because that we'll be able to report on that year after year. and see some progress there.
Which is exactly
Um,
what that plug was made.
Again, those are the three we chose to recommend in this report. That's about the extent of the choice we had in this. The rest of it is very mandated by the state legislation on what needs to be in this report.
What, like something like implement a mortgage assistance program for employees within the municipality? I mean, that seems to be that seems exciting to me, because that means more of the people work here, live here, and are part of the community that they work in, right? Is that just too cumbersome? Why did you choose, I understand you chose these three maybe because they were low-hanging fruits, but
Budget implications too, maybe.
Well, budget implications, but also cost of housing is a huge element of that as well.
And in Salt Lake County where you can reasonably find housing, maybe not in Cottonwood, but in the area, this applies really well to cities like Park City, Springdale, Moab, cities where if there's not a lot of housing stock for the staff that lives there, and there's these programs that exist to keep the staff in the area where they can't really go anywhere else nearby.
So is this plan then updated how often?
The plan itself, I don't know. There's no clear number for that, but we do have to report on it annually.
I mean, if we wanted to modify this going forward in our years,
We can modify it anytime. It's just an element of the general plan, so if we get general plan funding and wanna take another look at this a year from now, we certainly can. It's just gotta have 3 of these items on it.
There'll be elements of updates too over time.
Back one page. I just wanna look at the first estimate.
is that where I was?
I would just move on, I'm just kidding.
Okay,
Go just a couple more, one more. Okay, it's, back one. The planning commission heard this on the 16th of October. I don't believe there was any public comment, and they recommended unanimous approval. And again, the council needs to make a final decision on this by December 1st, and then we submit this to the Department of Workforce Services, WFRC, and post it on the website. And this is just an FYI. There's a lot of demographic and data in the report itself that you can read through, but everything's based on area median income. The area median income for Cottonwood Heights is $86,207. It's quite high in comparison to some of the other cities in the county. And 27% of households right now are below 80% AMI. It's based on HUD data.
I thought it was interesting that 28% of homes in Cottonwood Heights are multi-family.
You have a lot of doors.
Yeah,
a few
it's the
projects.
density. So the findings right now, there is actually a small surplus of affordable and available units at that median income rate. And it's actually not 50 to 80, it's actually just 80%. Once you drop below 80, it becomes a little less available. But right now, there is a reasonable opportunity for people to find housing at 80%. Once you drop below that, and I think this is probably a trend we'll see across many cities, is there's quite a deficit of affordable units below that 50% area median income.
Can you go back a second? I just wanted to see the 50%.
That's 40. That's a big look.
We need to hurry around.
Yeah. So what this is saying is the projected city population peak is in 2030. If we grew no more from today or from these numbers onward, we'd have a shortage in about 586 units needed at all income levels, which could lead to a deficit in all affordability categories.
I thought it was interesting too, how the population after 23 starts to go
It
down.
and it was attributed to aging and kids moving out, families down.
Some of us will be dead. So.
That's not what the report says, man.
Didn't say who, so
So the 3 recommendations at the end of the study are continuing to utilize, we can reword this as well, but the PDD ordinance requirements that require a percentage of units to be affordable. Focusing on reinvesting CRA funds towards moderate income housing. And then for that really extremely low income housing availability, the best way to do this is to collaborate with community partners, other jurisdictions, to work on a solution.
Well, I can't wait to start talking more about the CRA going forward.
Yeah, and there are creative ways to use those CRA funds that I'm prepared to talk about with us and other communities that can really help our residents, even existing residents that may be on a fixed income, that are retired, that you could look at home improvement programs for some of their older housing stuff. There's some good options that we could look at as well as partners, but we can talk about that later. And I need to just ask, next, we're gonna consider this next, in 2 weeks. Are you interested in having Christine Richmond come? Do you need her to come and talk about this? I need to know that, if you are requiring for her to come.
Approving this?
No, she's gonna come and present, we're approving it in 2 weeks.
She's scheduled to present.
To present in 2 weeks, do you need her to come to ask questions on this or not? That's the question I have.
I'm okay if she doesn't personally, but it's always interesting. Feelings in the council?
I don't think I
Let's have her come.
But
Take
that
10
doesn't mean
minutes.
anything, I just,
Yeah.
did I?
Let her take 10, have her take
How
10
much?
minutes.
No, she,
Yeah, she's been here before a couple of
they
years.
last updated in
She's on the
2017.
bank, right?
No, GFDS is
Oh,
all.
that's right.
They did the last update in 2017, so a lot of the
She's
format.
scheduled and we paid for
Well,
it.
she's not scheduled.
It's not paid for.
And we're not paying.
It's not paid
Oh.
for.
Yeah, it's not, it can be, it's in the project budget, but her coming in person is
Additional cost.
more of a cost than just kind of the admin work to prepare the plan, either way.
Feelings? So it's an added cost to have her come. I'm okay with not, it's pretty basic. Okay?
Just from a budget perspective, these changes were anticipated, this was funded in the last approved budget, so there's no budget impact to this. Okay, that's all I have. This
Now you
segues-
have one more thing.
Yes, this segues into the next item, this is very quick. This is the small cell ordinance, this was
This is
adopted.
actually pretty interesting.
This was adopted a while ago. This is, where these small cell facilities are considered public utilities. We had to adopt an ordinance that was, again, very strictly regulated by the state. There was a provision in that ordinance that has come to our attention very recently. If you can go to the next slide. You can see the red line changes here, but previously, to try to avoid these poles going up and down small residential streets, there was a provision that limited the location of these facilities along streets that were 60 feet wide or less. But then we got a kind of a general question from an interested party that asked about putting it at the corner of a cul-de-sac and then measuring across the cul-de-sac instead of across the street, and cul-de-sacs are wider than 60 feet. So we quickly put together, credit to Shane on getting this together so quickly, some language to address that as well. Adding a provision that this restriction also applies to cul-de-sacs that are 100 feet wide or less. Standard cul-de-sac is 85 to 90, 100 is a pretty good spot to land on. Okay, one more slide. So that just shows, I think the interested party had shown one about right here and said, well, I'm gonna measure like that. And because it was right there, we said, no, you gotta measure adjacent to it. But if they just moved it over here, then we don't have a good provision to address that, so we're just
They
looking.
can still move across and goes clear down the street if they're.
Okay,
Good catch, good catch.
is there gonna be a problem moving the 100 feet to 150? Just because you've added circle roundabouts in there, their design size tends to be a little bit bigger than 100 feet.
Yeah, I mean, we're open. I think the general intent is to keep these out of the small residential neighborhoods. If you have
Cul-de-sac,
if you have a roundabout on a major thoroughfare, that may be a little different, but.
Anyway, ask Matt, see, I mean, just, that would be my only question.
Roundabout, still a street.
We're asking though for a decision on this tonight.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm fine, I never like going to the question, is there a
Doesn't
problem?
have to, it's not in the zoning ordinance. This is a right-of-way utility code.
I think it looks good.
I think we proceed and then if we want to look further again, oh, sure.
Just change it within like another night, right?
Or
We
we
need-
can
we need
change
to
it.
But we recommend a decision tonight.
No,
Can we,
that's not what
She said if we
can
want
we
to
change it to
further.
150 tonight before we vote, is the question?
There,
We can.
there are issues with
Okay.
this, so I recommend being as conservative as you can.
Get this passed and we can come back
If we want to
if
look at
there's
it.
a need.
And I'm not sure where it would apply, that's just,
If you took out traffic circle, would that?
I mean, I get what this is going, and this definitely accomplishes that. If we maybe see that there's an issue with it, we can address it later. If Shane's more comfortable in getting this.
Well,
going
because of
through
some of the applications we're getting stuff, we need to move on it so we don't get somebody sticking in a cul-de-sac.
Okay.
All right,
Legislation.
okay, we've only got 25 minutes. Just want to bring your attention to the calendar. What's not on the calendar is a Thanksgiving 5K the city sponsors on Thanksgiving morning. Run starts at 9 o'clock, 2,000 runners. Everyone who beats the mayor gets a special ribbon.
How did you do last year?
It's the 35th year of the race.
They didn't run out of ribbons?
I've run every one in 35 years. Maybe my last.
I recall there were only 3 that got rid of it.
Yeah, like 700 right there. Yeah, but my interest. All right, so, that, we have a closed session item that will be 15, 20 minutes, so I will entertain a motion to, move into closed session and, personnel.
And that's correct, right?
Personnel, Shane?
I think that's correct.
So could I mention just briefly as everyone's transitioning, I did go back and look after, 2018, we actually did collect some data in the post-race survey on the economic impact. I'll go ahead and email that out to Tim,
Okay,
and Tim can distribute from there if that's okay.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I move that we close the open session on open